Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Molly was always Daddy's favorite, a little girl for as long as she could remember. Her father was everything to her and Daddy, and Mom and teacher, and friend, in general everything. Molly's mom died in childbirth and was heartbroken. Her father didn't even want to look at the child for the first time. That was told to her much later by her grandmother. Apparently, that's why, trying to make up for his long-standing guilt towards his daughter. Or maybe it was because Molly was growing up, becoming incredibly similar to her mother. Her father tried to give her everything to the best of his ability. He had the opportunity to do so to the maximum. He was a very wealthy man, and before Perestroika, when he headed a large factory, and after, when successfully corporatized, it became the general director of a new closed joint stock company, and gradually under himself almost everything in his native city. He personally and through front men owned factories, stores, gas stations, resorts, hotels, and even a luxury yacht club dream of his own childhood. His last adult toy. Molly grew up in such an environment. Like most of her peers, it was hard to even imagine. On the one hand, she had absolutely everything one could want. And on the other, a huge lack of socialization. From a very young age, she was never left unsupervised for a minute. A whole staff of nannies kept a close eye on the princess, guarding her from the slightest danger. Preschooler Molly didn't attend a regular kindergarten, nor did she attend the most privileged one. In her father's opinion, it was a very dangerous place. Anyone could hurt his adored daughter. In addition, knowing perfectly well the number of his ill-wishers, he could not allow such a thought that his daughter was somewhere without personal protection. Therefore, Molly arranged a kindergarten at home, their own mini garden. Several children her age were carefully selected. And of course, the parents of those children were his business partners. A little lower in rank. Molly was the queen here, and she was well aware of that. She could do anything. The rest of the adults and children had to obey. In order for his daughter to go to school, Michael, her father's name was, ordered the creation of his own private school. It was the only way to be sure of teachers, students, and security. All these categories of staff and students were subjected to the strictest, multi-stage selection process. Thus, Molly lived in a world within a world, and in this own world she continued to be a queen. Not one single time in her life did she experience what all normal children have. She wasn't alone at the store. She didn't ride her bike to her girlfriend's house on the nearest street. She didn't socialize with random people her father didn't know. She was never alone anywhere at all. The stern and imposing shadows of security guards loomed everywhere. But here's the strange thing. With such an unnatural way of life, Molly did not become a soulless monster without conscience and without warmth in her heart. Perhaps her character was influenced by the genes of her untimely departed mother. A very sweet, kind, compassionate woman. And her father, for all his oddities, was not a bad man. He was just terrified of losing his daughter. He wouldn't have survived a second loss like that. What can a girl who has everything dream of? It would seem that such a girl should grow up or soulless, empty, or cruel and calculating projetulnitsa life. And there are many examples of this. The children of majors finally released into the world, rolling state of their parents, wind up random and dangerous connections, smash in the junk expensive cars, and crashed in them themselves, ruin and break human destinies. But Molly is happily past it all, deprived of real life. She recognized it from books. The girl loved to read from a young age. She read everything she could get her hands on. At first, not everything was available. But in the rapidly advancing age of global internetization, Molly, getting access to almost unlimited information, began to imagine, at least in theory, how the real world works. By nature, she was not a stupid girl. And by the age of 15, even her father's strictest prohibitions did not prevent her from learning what she wanted to know. And it was not only in those areas of life which prohibit all parents to all children and at all times. Not at all. She was mostly interested in questions of social structure, history, religion, psychology, and similar things. Besides, she had her own hobby. Molly loved adventure. being deprived of the opportunity to experience at least the simplest of them. For example, an outing to a neighboring ravine or a night at the campfire, or an ordinary walk in the woods for mushrooms. She swallowed tons of adventure novels, watched relevant movies, and even tried to write herself about distant countries, uncharted spaces, mysterious planets, and fairy tale creatures, holding the keys to magical treasures. Again, you read reader, my favorite father, coming home, affectionately kissed his daughter on the fluffy top of her head. What have you got there? Alice in Wonderland. It's a good book. And satisfied that his daughter was doing something safe and useful, he smiled approvingly, saying hello to the Pirates of the Caribbean to Molly, who was watching Jack Sparrow and reading 15-year-old Captain Headless Horseman. And things like that. Dad, let's go somewhere in the jungle, Molly begged her father. Or the desert coast. What could happen to us there? There's no one for miles around. Why are you so sure that you will survive at least 2 days on a deserted coast? My father laughed, turning everything into a joke. There are no toilets or hot water. And no one will feed us 3 times a day, so be it, Molly argued. We'll cook on the fire ourselves. Can you shoot? Dad, I was shooting, answered my father evasively, grinning. You know, darling, we've already got reservations for the Dead Sea at the Radisson for the fall. Radisson sighed the daughter, knowing in advance that a separate penthouse or bungalow was waiting for her there. 24-hour security. No other tourists around the tour, only individual stores, only deserted. That is, super expensive, where ordinary people are not allowed on the doorstep. Dad, I just want to go out so bad. She was pestering her dad and her friend. We could take the bus to the center ourselves. I looked up the route. What could happen to us? And the father answered in a tone that didn't tolerate objections. Anything could happen. You're too young to realize that. But other children are allowed to go out alone. I objected. Molly, I'm gonna spend my whole life behind a wall under guard. You're not the others. The father replied grandly, starting to get angry. And remember, you are my daughter, and I personally make sure that nothing happens to you. You see, there are too many people around here who want to hurt us. Why? Molly wondered. Because I've accomplished so much in this life, her father explained. Envy is the reason people are so cruel. They envy what we have. If only there was something to envy. Molly sighed quietly to herself. It's like living in a prison. But from any prison, any prisoner dreams to break out, to get freedom. Even from a golden cage with 3 meals a day. Molly was no exception to that rule. Teenagers can be very resourceful. And one day she simply escaped from her vigilant guards by quickly changing her clothes in the restroom of a luxury store. That day there was a fashion show, and for that reason quite crowded. Socialites, young majors, and rich moms, who brought their daughters to admire the latest fashion collections and order something for sure. Molly went into the restroom one person and came out a completely different person. She wore a brown curly wig, purchased in advance in an online store, other clothes, and even glasses, not sunglasses, but with simple glasses, imitating a girl with ophthalmologic problems reincarnation. She managed so well that the bodyguards did not notice anything when this strange girl walked past them and slipped out into the street. I got it. In the square, a friend was waiting for Molly at the agreed-upon spot, with a little more freedom. Yes, a joyously excited Molly was bouncing with excitement. Let's go to that cafe you told me about. The girls went out that day until 8 p.m. They didn't dare to stay out longer. The other girl had to be home by a certain time. But even these few hours were enough for Molly's father to raise the whole town. But all efforts were in vain. No one ever found them. You see, Dad, Molly triumphed. The next day, when her father's first rage had subsided. Nothing happened to us, but Michael could have been angry. Anything could have happened. No one would even recognize me in this outfit. The redhead and the green-eyed one laughed. Molly, I got colored lenses. Well, tell me honestly, did you recognize me when I came home? No, Dad exhaled. I didn't recognize you at all. Aha, Molly was at the top of her game. So I'm right. Please, Dad, just let me go for a walk once in a while. I'm not a canary that needs to be in a cage all the time, you know. The father only sighed heavily and looked at his growing daughter with regret and love. Of course, he realized that he would never be able to put her under a golden castle or put her in a tower like Rapunzel. I wish he could. Maybe I was too much. Too much, he stammered, unable to find the right words. Yes, Dad stroked his arm affectionately. Molly's too much. I'm 15 now, you know. I'm gonna be an adult soon. It's time to learn a little bit about the real world. How am I going to live in it if I never learn anything? But you're not going to go off on a wild goose chase. Dad's worried. I'm not gonna let that happen. Come on, Dad, don't worry. Molly was infinitely pleased with her success. She was soft and compliant. You and me, we'll make a deal. I promise to always tell you where I am. I don't care if your big boys follow me around, but only to normal places. Okay, I'll go to the mall. They can sit in the back. I'll go to the movies. They can sit in the back. But just let me finally feel like a free man. Good father, good daughter. Since that momentous day, Molly has enjoyed relative freedom. Of course, she did not expect a strong result, but what she got was enough. Now she could sit with her friends in an ordinary coffee shop, go to the movies for the simplest session, take there a bucket of popcorn and sit with all the normal people, laugh and think about nothing. The sullen shadows of the bulky bodyguards didn't embarrass her in the least. She had gotten so used to them in her life that she had hardly noticed them when she was already a university student. No, her father had already failed to build his own university for his daughter. Molly and her friends often sat in Donner, a small, cozy place near the university, by the way, one of the few not owned by her father. But that wasn't even the point. It was close to the university here. You could skip an unnecessary pair and not be late for the next one. The food was pretty good and the prices were quite reasonable. Molly, of course, could afford everything. But the others couldn't, and she was quite happy here. She was young and unassuming. That day they were quietly, peacefully studying for an art history test. And laughing, of course, the usual. And then Nancy pulled out of her enormous chauffeur's drawer a nice little box. What's this? The girls wondered. Tarot cards, Nancy proudly announced. Would you like a fortune-telling? Art history was immediately forgotten, and the girls watched Nancy with interest. It is important to lay out unusual cards, much larger than a simple deck of cards. This arcana is called the Magician, Nancy said with a mysterious look. And this is the Gallows. What do they mean? The girls just fell in love with the beautiful and elegantly drawn pictures. It depends, Nancy answered evasively, depending on whether the position is upright or inverted. You see, the mat can lie like this, or it can lie like this, and then it's bad. Then the combination of the arcanas is of great importance. In short, there are many variations. Each one has its own layout. How do you know that? The audience was curious. Where did you get it? My cousin's sister gave it to me. She and her parents came to Samara on vacation and lived there. She has long been fond of these tarot cards and astrology numerology. Very interesting. Molly furrowed her beautiful smooth forehead. But I don't think it's all true. To believe or not to believe in fortune-telling, everyone decides for himself. With the look of a skillful professional, Nancy parried. The tarots have been known since the Middle Ages. They came into the world together with Kabbalah kings and generals, favorites of emperors, and world-famous magicians. Famous actors and great artists have used these cards. They decided the fate of the world. You should be a writer, not a designer. Molly laughed. You tell it like it's written. Thank you. I'm not the least bit confused. Nancy, let me play solitaire for you. We'll see. Will it come true for you or not? Come on, you said yes. Skeptical Molly. Why not? Let's see. Nancy began laying out the various pictures on the table with a concentrated look. Let's do a Celtic cross. It shows the very near future. Well, what do we have here? She began to turn the cards in a sequence, laid out shapely upside down on the wheel of fortune. Lovers. And what's this? Emperor and Empress together. Oh wow. What's what? The girls were impatient to see what the cards would say. Wait, wait, wait. Nancy was deftly turning over the last of the pictures. King of Wands, 5 of cups, 9 of balls. Oh, I am, of course, an inexperienced tarot fortune teller. Molly Nancy looked closely at the smiling Molly. But you know, this is the first time I've ever gotten one of these. Usually it's something not quite definite or just plain ordinary. I don't even know why so many strong cards came up together. Maybe I didn't mix it right. Come on, just say it. The other girl, Wendy, couldn't take it anymore. Our date's coming up, and we, by the way, also want to know what's in store for us. So finish it well, sighed Nancy. And as if suddenly determined, she looked up at Molly. In short, soon you will meet the king and a fiery passion will erupt between you. Then your life will change so much that it will seem incredible, and you will suffer and suffer remorse. But you will still follow your lover, though he may not be what you thought he was. And then she was silent for a moment, gathering her thoughts or her wits. And besides, you'll be a priestess. A what? Molly was already convulsing with laughter, sliding under the table. The other girls weren't far behind. It was a ridiculous and stupid guessing game. The priestess laughed. Wendy could barely make it out. You gypsy. Oh, come on, Nancy. I didn't make it all up. It's what the cards say. What can I do? Don't fill your head with nonsense. That's what I'm laughing about. Molly stood up resolutely. Come on, we're already late. The girls paid the bill and a motley flock of girls jumped out of the cafe and cheerfully headed for their alma mater's auditorium. The next pair of this very art history class, for which they should have been preparing instead of solitaire, was on the 3rd floor of the university. The friends were almost up the wide staircase, but suddenly Molly, who was walking ahead, stopped like a halt. Just a little bit more and Nancy, following her foot and foot, would have fallen down the stairs from the unexpected obstacle. What are you doing? She shrieked indignantly. Getting stuck in the middle of nowhere almost dropped me. But Molly didn't hear her. She neither heard nor saw anything around her, except for the searing stare of the fiery black eyes staring back at her. The owner of those eyes was standing directly across from her in the middle of the recreation room, looking as if they'd known each other for a long time. And Molly sensed a commanding expression in that gaze, though no single word was spoken. The words guy was very handsome with some kind of wild, primordial, unbridled, even beauty. Black wavy hair, in which a hint of redness slipped through like sparks. So they seemed not truly black, but rather the color of very dark polished wood. And in his eyes there was the same mysterious spark hidden in the abyss of black glasses. A tall, statuesque, but still youthfully flexible guy stood as if he were a gentleman here freely, independently with dignity. Who is this? The shorter Nancy poked her head out from behind Molly's shoulder. What's handsome? We haven't seen him here before, and the other girls looked at the strange, handsome man with interest. And he was only looking at Molly, and she was looking at him. And between these two almost palpably ran an electric discharge, which was visible and clear not only to them, but also to everyone around. There was a rush of hurriedly running and seconds of cheerful students scurrying around during recess. Someone was hurrying somewhere, and 2 people suddenly stopped by some powerful force stood motionless like statues frozen momentarily and looked at each other without taking their eyes off. Shall we go insensitive? Nancy tugged Molly's sleeve and she stopped staring. Let's go. Why did Molly seem to come out of her stupor? Did she say something? I said stop staring at him. Everyone's already staring at you too. Let's go. We're about to start a class. Or do you want to be reprimanded? On automatic, Molly agreed and let herself be led away. And while she and Nancy were catching up with the others, walking down the long corridor, which, like a hose full of water river, flowed out of the wide recreation at the back of her head, she felt the burning gaze of that guy. It was like hot needles stinging her skin. Art history. Molly sat as if in water lowered and could hardly write half of her ticket. Wrote something out of place, and her thoughts were still there in the recreation room, near the staircase, where it was as if an electric shock pierced her. That striking look of such unusual, never seen before, but at the same time strangely familiar eyes. Molly caught herself thinking that she was not writing anything at all. The pen is lying next to her, and she is sitting and looking out the window. With a glance around, the audience are still sitting, diligently digging over the credit. She stood up, handed in her work, and walked out of the classroom, accompanied by the surprised looks of her classmates. In a completely empty recreation room, sat quietly on a sofa. Molly saw him, barely turned from the corner of the corridor wall. She wasn't even surprised, all relaxed. Softened. The first frightening tension of the encounter was gone. Molly approached him like a young horse that had accidentally escaped from the herd and recognized its master. "Hello, Rami," he said with a smile. "I'm glad to see you." "Hello." Molly smiled back at him, and a strange joy pierced her whole being. But at the same time, she became unusually anxious, and hot goosebumps ran from her temples to her feet. "What did you call me?" she asked him, and without waiting for an answer, added, "My name was Molly." "Good," he smiled again. "And I, Miss Mason," repeated the girl, thoughtfully, as if trying this name to taste very beautiful and so unusual. "You must be a foreigner." "Yes," agreed the boy. "In a way, you speak English well," Molly complimented him. "You study here with almost no accent. It's strange, but I've never seen you before." "My family is in town on business for quite a while," Mason explained. "I've decided to take an arts and crafts class in the meantime. And you're an extra. Got it?" "Molly, okay. Where are you studying?" "At home, I've already finished my education," said Mason with dignity, as if he was presenting his title. But Molly looked at him questioningly. He didn't look more than 20, but who knows? Maybe he just looked young. "You look very Italian." Suddenly she said, without knowing why. "Close?" Mason grinned. "Close." "Tell me," she asked, like a little girl who wants to know someone else's secret. "You'll know too much before you're old." Mason laughed, tilting his head and showing his dazzling gleaming teeth. "Let's go." He took her hand and led the way. Molly followed him quietly and happily, not even asking where they were going. She felt so good, so safe. Yes, safe. She felt like she was behind a stone wall with this complete stranger. Like she'd met a relative she just hadn't seen in a long time. They walked out of the building, through the spacious university grounds, and down an alley lined with blue spruce trees and rose bushes to the parking lot. The alarm beeped, and the automatic doors of a dazzling white BMW sports car opened in front of her. Lifted sideways and upward. Not even her father had such a car. Cool. Molly marveled as she sat down in the front seat, which was covered in soft, creamy leather. And then some annoying thought scratched her consciousness, as if there was something wrong with everything that was going on. And suddenly Molly guessed and cried out loud. "Shit, where's Daddy's surveillance?" Sleeping soundly, Mason informed her, as if he knew what he was talking about. Sleeping. Molly marveled and followed Mason's pointing gestures. Suddenly she really saw her two big, burly men, who had been following her around since this morning. As glued, these two leaned against each other, like small children tired of the walk, sweetly slept on a bench right in the parking lot in the shade, near the car in which Molly came here. "What's wrong with them?" Molly asked Mason in a whisper, as if afraid to wake them. "I don't know," he shrugged. "It's hot today. Tired, I guess." "Wow." The girl laughed uncontrollably and leaned back in the comfortable seat, laughing till she cried. While Mason confidently drove out of the narrow driveway of the university parking lot. "Damn me. I've lived here for years, and I've never had that happen. So I'm completely free." She leaned triumphantly out of the open car window and shouted, "Free as hell." "Free." Mason looked at her smiling. He was obviously very pleased. Molly sat perfectly happy, and with her cheek to the warm late spring breeze, she looked forward with pleasure. The BMW raced like a young exuberant mare, leaving the other cars far behind. Here they have already passed the city limits, swept along the long and open-work braided cast iron spans of the bridge over the full-flowing river, and on the country road rushed somewhere in the distance. They passed villages painted in all shades of green, sprouting fields, past lakes and streams through the tops of sloping trees overhanging the narrow two-lane highway. Molly didn't even ask where they were going. She didn't care. An intoxicating sense of total freedom swept over her. A joyful haze enveloped her from head to toe. She would fly like that, like a free bird, and never stop. However, they did stop near a nice tourist complex lost somewhere away from the big road. Barimde. Read aloud to Molly on the sign that it turned out to be she turned to Mason pulling a large bag out of the car. The inn, he shrugged, was pretty nice. They have great food here. I couldn't bring you anywhere else. Well, yes, Molly agreed and asked, and we'll see about it tonight. Mason grinned enigmatically. We'll see. They had a wonderful lunch in a half-empty restaurant. The grilled meat was really delicious, fragrant with the smell of the fire. They laughed and chatted about nothing and everything in the world. Then, no matter how much she tried, she couldn't remember what it was about. After the meal, Molly thought of her father and texted him, "Don't worry, Daddy, I'm fine. I'll write when I get home. I was gonna add something. A joke about the stupid guards, but I changed my mind. I mean, they're already in for a hell of a beating. Why make it worse? Let's go for a walk." Mason called her when they had finished their coffee, and Molly was sitting on the log veranda of the restaurant, looking at the lazily running river. "Let's go," she agreed. "Why do you need a backpack?" asked, seeing that her companion puts impressive bags on his shoulders. "You'll see," he promised her, and the girl did not ask any more questions. They walked for quite a long time, mostly along the riverbank, only occasionally turning into the forest. If the straight road was very difficult, Molly didn't whine or complain, but just walked and walked after Mason, as if she'd spent her whole life wandering through forests and fields. Good thing she always preferred comfortable shoes. Today she was wearing light, weightless sneakers, and her feet didn't feel tired at all from the long walk. Finally, they came to a path through the tall grass to a steep cliff above the river. What beauty! Molly marveled, folding her palms against the bright afternoon sun. In the distance, as far as the eye could see, the river plain was silvery. Apparently there was a flood. The lone island in the middle of the river seemed tiny from here, and the vegetation on it looked no bigger than field grass. All around, along with the water, there was an unbelievable peace. Not a living soul for many versts around, just the two of them. A steep sandy cliff, overgrown with fragrant meadow grasses, and a marvelous river landscape. Molly walked almost to the very edge. She stood with her arms spread wide and threw her head back into the bright blue sky. Suddenly, her foot crawled. Rocks sprinkled and the treacherous cliff led the girl downward. Molly cried out, but Mason, fast as lightning, was already clutching her by the waist, hugging her tightly with his strong arms. "It's all right. Don't be frightened by the Murokamua." Whether from fright or for some other reason, he switched to a language Molly didn't recognize. Her heart was beating frequently, her breath caught, and she was out of breath. Fear was replaced by some other feeling she'd never known before, both sweet and slightly repulsive. As you said, she turned to him and their faces almost touched. "What did you say in a whisper?" she interjected. Mason did not answer, but only looked at the girl with the long, lively gaze of his impossible eyes. Their lips met. Molly felt dizzy, and it seemed to her that she was falling again, falling from a great height. Her heart sank into her heels, her breathing quickened, and the world stopped suddenly. Finally, Mason released her from his embrace, and without a word to each other, they started down the steep, rocky path down to the shore. Here, in a tiny cove surrounded on all sides by rising limestone cliffs, Mason set up camp. From his large rucksack, he took out, and in a few minutes he set up a very comfortable tent with a tarpaulin floor and mosquito netting. A zippered tent with a pump. A large firm mattress pulled out 2 light, folding chairs and a compact camping barbecue, as well as a bucket with marinated kebab. When did you have time to cook all this? Molly marveled sincerely. Their little shelter was fully equipped with everything they needed. Even a small tin kettle was taken out of Mason's immense backpack. "I always have a hiking backpack with me." Her companion flashed a blonde smile. "I bought the kebab at the restaurant. No magic." He laughed again, and with this sincere laugh dispelled vague suspicions. "Molly, about this whole camping trip." Together, they walked along the shore barefoot, right through the water, because there was no free shore on either side. Just this tiny little piece of land hidden beneath the shoreline. We walked some distance, splashing water with our feet and laughing merrily. We reached the next strip of land. We picked up some dry pollack steer. We loaded Mason's empty backpack with them and went back the same way. Soon there was already crackling under the brazier, a small fire just big enough to boil a kettle. Molly is already holding a hot aluminum mug in her hands, carefully blowing on the wonderful smelling herbal tea. Some herb Mason had gathered right here, and he went upstairs again and brought a bunch and showed it to Molly. Look, this is thyme, and this is field oregano. This one's blue. What kind of grass is interested? Asked the girl. It's vervain, Mason answered her. You like it? Yes. Molly twisted the long blue lilac inflorescence in her fingers and inhaled the tart aroma of the woman's herb with pleasure, Mason said. For medicine, it's harvested at dawn, when the dew is still wet. How do you know all this? Molly marveled for the umpteenth time that day. It is the tradition of my people, the boy told her seriously. We all know these things. What people? Careful, Molly asked, looking into Mason's swarthy face. Tell me, what people are the Romels? Proudly answered Mason, looking her in the eyes with a challenging look. Do you know one? No, said Molly. I don't. Do your people call us gypsies? Mason said calmly. Oh, suddenly lively. Molly, I know. I've read Danko. Mason only grinned ironically. It's just a fairy tale. Let her agree. Molly, it may be a fairy tale, but it's beautiful. Do you like fairy tales? He looked at her fondly. You're just a child. Is that a bad thing? Molly prepared to be offended. No, he smiled again. How old are you? 19. Molly said proudly. I'm old enough. Too old. Mason grinned. Our girls get married at 13, 14, sometimes 15. If parents can't find a suitable groom for a long time, if a girl isn't married at 19, it's unlikely she'll ever get married. I'm not getting married, Molly laughed. We don't get married that young anymore. What's the point anyway? So think about it before it's too late. The boy moved his eyebrows, pretending to be an old maid. Oh, you're funny. Molly laughed. I'll get over it. Don't you want to find your love and have kids? Asked Mason. I don't know, Molly shrugged. I haven't thought about it yet. Have you? She asked him quickly and slyly. You've already found your love. I don't know, Mason sighed for some reason. What do you mean, you don't know? Mason was silent for a while, picking up his mug of tea, and Molly thought he was just going to leave her question unanswered. But then he spoke, and what he said shocked the girl. I have a fiancée, he informed her in his most casual tone. A beautiful, well-behaved girl, and our parents have approved this union. That's how it is, Molly replied in a low voice. But she didn't show it, trying to hold herself together, though a storm was raging inside her. I thought I loved her, Mason continued. Until I met you today. He stared at her fixedly with his hypnotic gaze. Would you believe me if I told you that I knew we'd met? Said Molly, who couldn't quite get the words out with the excitement of the moment. My grandmother told me a fortune. Quite seriously, the boy answered her. Molly was suddenly twisted by an uncontrollable fit of laughter. She literally folded in half, sitting on a light, tarpaulin chair. What are you laughing at? Offended? Asked Mason. You don't believe in fortune-telling. Actually, I don't even know, said Molly, laughing. But I'm not laughing because I don't like fortune-telling. It's just that a friend told me today that I would meet my destiny soon. She looked openly at Mason, and a lot of other things, and I didn't believe her. And now he looked at her with a long look, too, and took her small hand in his warm, secure palm. Do you believe it now? I don't know, Molly said softly. It's all so strange. I just don't understand anything yet. Well, okay. Suddenly letting go of her hand and changing his tone, Mason said cheerfully, Let's go for a swim. Let's go for a swim. But I don't have my bathing suit with me. You're not wearing underwear either, Mason said calmly. The difference with bathing suits is small, in my opinion. No, Molly frowned. It's indecent to bathe then. So in a t-shirt, he told her. I have a spare t-shirt with me. I can give it to you. Come on, while Molly sat pensive, not knowing how to react to such an unexpected offer. He went into the tent, poked around a bit, and came out again in his underwear and with a clean t-shirt in his hands, tossing it carelessly on an empty chair. He ran into the water and ran up to his waist, jumped up like a big water animal, and then dived, hiding under the water. He was gone more than a minute, and Molly was beginning to worry when her new acquaintance finally surfaced. Quite far from the place where he entered the river's surface with a smooth movement. Come on, it came to her in the surrounding serene silence. Let's not be afraid. After hesitating for a moment, just a little more, the girl entered the tent, quickly threw off her clothes, put on the offered t-shirt, and stepping gingerly over the bank, gingerly stepped knee-deep into the cold water. Come on, Mason called out to her. Can you do it? Clamming up, Molly ran through the water and collapsed like a log into what she thought was a frighteningly icy wave. Her whole body felt like it was pierced by 1,000 sharp needles and her breath caught. But in the next moment it felt so wonderful. Incredible vigor was instilled in Molly, and a hot warmth spilled inside her exactly filled her with some unprecedented energy. She wanted to shout with joy, swim like a fast dolphin and fly into the air, to dive straight out of the water like a flying fish. But she couldn't do any of that, and she just floundered helplessly. She swam in circles like an untrained city dog who was forcibly pushed from the boat into the water. Nearby came the rapid thumping of hands on the water. Loud laughter, and Mason swam up to her, up close, wrapped his arms around her across her torso, and dragged her to the middle of the river. Where are you scared, Molly? What if you and I drown here? No, he laughed. Don't be afraid, but I am. Molly protested. There could be these pools. There's the seaweed. She shuddered at the thought of getting caught in the long, sticky seaweed that would wrap around her body like ropes. But nothing like that happened. And in about 10 minutes, they were chasing each other along the shore of the islet, the very one she was looking at from the cliff to warm up and dry off. After running, they fell exhausted by bathing on soft, silky grass and lay for a long time, looking at the passing clouds. The sky was gradually losing its daytime depth and the clouds, fleeing into the distance. They lined up in a crowded ridge on the horizon, inviting the tired sun to sink into its soft, wind-whipped featherbed. Look, it'll be dark soon. Molly caught on. Do you want to leave here? Mason asked her, looking into her face. No, she answered, thinking a little. But I have to. My father will be very worried. Text him that you're not coming, Mason suggested. You said you were an adult, didn't you? Molly was silent. She was struggling desperately with two great desires to stay here with Mason and to experience what she knew would happen if they were alone together in the silence of the night. Molly had not yet had such an experience in this little tent, in spite of her adulthood. And on the other hand, she was terribly afraid and wanted to be home in her familiar, safe, and favorite girl's crib. Let's swim back, said Mason, rising. We've got to dry off and get back to the hotel. Good, if we get to town by 10 o'clock. Molly also got up from the grass and looked at him with warmth and respect. After all, he hadn't talked her down, despite his obvious desire to be alone with her. Hold on to me yourself, he told her as they entered the water again. Swim harder, it's getting colder, or you'll freeze to death. Molly put her arm around his neck, and they swam side by side like two big fish on the shore. He quickly pulled a large towel from the tent and wiped the girl properly from top to bottom, then pulled out a small, elegant flask. Drink up, or you'll get sick. Jesus, choked Molly, taking a big gulp. What in heaven's name is this? Romal balm. Mason smirked. Is that stuff strong? Wait, it'll kick in. It didn't take long. In half a minute, Molly felt that instead of blood, she had molten fire flowing through her veins. And from top to toe, she was pumped with such a heat that no cold could scare her anymore. I'm leaving. Molly jumped up as high as she could and danced on the sand. A strange and fiery dance. What's that? Mason looked at her and laughed. Look, I'll teach you. He lifted his hands and, as if put them next to him in the air, on an invisible support, and began to step carefully in a given rhythm, and at the same time humming louder and louder charming and incendiary melody. Swaying from side to side, describing a semicircle on the sand, Slam hands changed position, and the movement continued in the other direction. and again in a semicircle. "Come here, you can do it," he called Molly, who watched him like a mesmerized woman. One step further, careful movements, faster, faster. And now the two of them are already spinning in a frenzied rhythmic dance, bouncing and slapping themselves with their hands on their thighs. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Finally, having finished the dance, Mason bowed ceremoniously to Molly, and taking her by the hand, took her to the tent to change and go. From the pocket of her jeans, a cell phone fell out of her jeans pocket, blinking brightly. Her father was calling her, and the display screen showed 23 unanswered calls and many messages. Molly wanted to answer it, but something kept her from doing so. That's what she's going to tell him now, that she's sitting God knows where on the bank of an unfamiliar river with a guy she doesn't know. And frankly, absolutely no intention of going home. The girl went to the message menu, quickly wrote, "Don't wait for me, Dad, I'll be there tomorrow," and firmly pressed the device's off button. Well, you're there as you dressed in the tent, scraping gingerly. Mason Molly slipped her hand out, grabbed his clothes, and pulled him inside, wrapped her arms around his neck, pressed her hot lips to his hot mouth. He responded to the kiss, but then gently pulled away and asked her with a direct look in his eyes. "Are you sure?" "Yes," nodded Molly quite confidently. Mason closed the zipper on the entrance, and the two of them were completely cut off from the outside world. It simply ceased to exist for them. The first rays of the gentle waking sun tickled Molly's eye, and the eye twitched open behind it, and the other blinked and woke up, adding to her view. The sight before the girl made her inwardly shudder. She was lying under the blanket next to Mason, and there was not the slightest trace of clothing on either of them. Little by little, she remembered all that had happened yesterday afternoon, and especially during the night. And she blushed thickly. However, she felt neither shame nor any regret. Everything happened voluntarily. No one forced her. She had decided so herself. Now she was a real adult and expected to decide her own fate. Mason woke up and found her sitting by the fire. The kettle was boiling, and on the thin branches were already baking scones from yesterday's stock. "Please," she smiled at him. "Breakfast was ready. I see you're a fast learner." He walked over and kissed her. "Good morning." "What did you say?" Molly interjected with a romp. "What does that mean?" "Does it mean wife?" Smiled Mason. "You are now my wife before the world, and I will not back down from my word." "What do you think a husband would be like?" asked Molly, seriously. "Rom," replied the guy to her. "Then you are my rum," Molly told him, looking him in the eyes in front of the world. "And I'm not going back on my word, honey." He put his arms around her. "My sweetheart, but that wouldn't be quite right. You have to find out about me." "Everything, of course," Molly nodded. "And you about me. But you know, I feel like we're going to be together from now on." Sitting down to breakfast, they told each other about themselves. Molly was the first to speak. She told a brief history of her not-so-long life, complained about her father's overprotection. Listening to her, Mason smiled. "My father is also a fairly wealthy man, but I myself am poor until I marry. The family will not provide maintenance. And where you live? You said your family is here on business." "Yes," Mason nodded. "We don't live in this country, and we don't stay in one place very long. But I can't tell you everything yet. You have to meet my family first. And even before that, I have to get home to comfort my father," the girl said. "He's going crazy there, I'm sure." Molly laughed nervously. "Let's go." Mason got up and started packing his backpack. "I'll take you on the way home." Molly felt a wave of anxiety and worry come over her. She was still very dependent on her father and used to obey him in everything. What would happen now? What if he gets angry, tries to lock her up? No, she reassured herself. I am no longer a child, but an adult and independent person. Even under the law, no one can make me do anything I don't want to do. Not even my own father. When they got almost all the way to Molly's house, she asked Mason to stop the car around the corner in an alley. "Aren't you going to introduce me to my dad?" Her boyfriend asked her. "Not today," Molly answered evasively. "I'm afraid he's not in the mood for introductions right now." "Okay, I'll call you." Mason leaned over and kissed her. "I'll see you later." "See you later, my love." And she walked briskly down the alley without turning around. Although she really wanted to. She had warned her father in advance, about half an hour in advance, that she was going home so that he wouldn't go off on his own to look for her. And she showed up, the prodigal daughter. Outwardly, her father was completely calm and even dryly smiled at her. "Hi, Dad," Molly said to him as if nothing had happened, and came up to kiss him. But he pulled away and said, "Why don't you explain why you disappeared in the first place? And how you escaped from the guards?" "I didn't run from them," Molly shrugged. "They fell asleep, both of them at once." The father laughed incredulously. "Well, yes," nodded the girl. "I was surprised myself." Suppose he drummed his fingers nervously on the table. "And what did you do when you had the chance?" "I went for a walk," she said. "Take it easy. Shall we have tea?" "Let's talk about this first," Dad said firmly. "I want to know where you've been." "I met someone," Molly said. "A very good man. I'm going to commit my life to him." "Dad." "I knew it." "Hands up, Dad." "Who? Who is this man of yours?" "His name is Mason. His parents are wealthy, so you don't have to worry about me." True, her father looked at her with skeptical irony. "But you've put me completely at ease. I know all the decent people in this town. What's his last name?" "Last name? I don't know." Molly was confused, didn't even ask. "Yeah, and his family's from out of town. They're here on business, like business." The father paced back and forth excitedly. They could be competitors. The bad guys put the guards to sleep, took you away, put you up to some lowlife. "Dad, don't panic." Molly even laughed when I met him at the university. Nobody forced me to go anywhere. Mason and I just went for a walk in the country, and what a nice walk it was. Dad said ironically. "Stop it, Dad." Molly blushed. "I'm an adult and I don't have to answer to you." "Ah, that's how it is." Her father finally let out his long-held anger. "So you don't have to. But you thought about me. Do you realize that I've been going crazy while you've been out and about? I texted you." Fighting back, Molly. "Isn't that enough? Or did you think you were going to spend your whole life looking after me like a little girl?" "Not all my life, Dad, just until I can arrange your future. I'm on my own, you hear me? I'll make my own future." Also yelled Molly. "And I won't let anyone, not even you, decide for me what it will be like." She turned and went to her room, slammed the door, closed, on the latch, fell on the bed and sobbed. As in a distant childhood, when she wanted to walk around the city with a girlfriend, but her father did not let her go. After blowing off steam, she calmed down, took a shower, and went out into the garden with a book and her phone. There was an unread message from Mason. "How are you, baby? Everything all right?" She almost texted his father in a rage. And she added a pity smiley face. Then she thought about it and added a heart on fire. "Too bad," wrote Mason back. "When I see you, let's do it tonight at 6 o'clock at the cafeteria near the university. You know Dunners? Aha. See you then, I'm looking forward to it, and hearts on fire too." Molly smiled and turned off her phone. She tried to pick up the book, but nothing was reading. The lines were jumping in front of her eyes, and the meaning of what she was reading was slipping away. Then she took the smartphone again and read all the messages from the girls, of which 500 messages had accumulated since yesterday. Nothing special, just a lot of chatter, and only one that caught her eye was from Nancy, who asked how things were going with the young king and whether she believed in yesterday's fortune-telling now. "It's okay," wrote her Molly, "the king is on top of things," and added a funny kissing face. "And then your cards were right." And Nancy wrote back with some cheerful nonsense too. But then Molly wondered if it was true that Mason had come into her life too quickly after that stupid tarot card reading. Coincidence? But it had said something about a fiery passion, and the cards had been right about that. Molly remembered the night in the tent and smiled to herself. And Mason had said something about divination too. His grandmother would have to ask him more. "Where are you going again?" The father, seeing that his daughter was about to leave the house, came out and stood in the doorway, hand in hand at the cafe with the girls. Molly muttered to him, "You'll be gone all night again." Dad was clearly not in the mood. Letting her go just like that isn't going to happen. Molly answered him rudely. "Let her go." Learn to speak politely first. He didn't think to move away. Did you really think I'd let you go anywhere after last night? And lock you up? Molly was furious. What am I, some kind of object to be disposed of? I'm not gonna let you go. Let it go. I said, look at her. She said. The father smirked and still wouldn't budge. All right, Molly said threateningly and turned and went to her room. She dialed Mason and asked him to come to the house on the side of the alley. There she had long ago made an opening in the fence, just in case. One of the sections of the fence was twisted from the bottom, so it could be moved to the side and you could get through. No one knew about it because it was made behind the ivy-covered netting where Molly liked to sit, reading or texting with the girls. 15 minutes later, she climbed out her bedroom window and was soon on the loose. Mason's car softly rustled its wheels and drove away from the house, taking her with it. I hate him in my heart, she said. Mason sat down in the seat and fastened his seatbelt. You shouldn't talk about your father like that. He stopped her with a gesture of his hand. It's too bad, but he treats me like his property. He's understandable. After all, he wants to protect you, Mason said. Listen to you, I shouldn't have left right now, Molly said wryly. Feelings are stronger than we are. What can you do? The boy sighed. Besides, it's fate, and you can't argue with fate. Listen, Mason, why don't you tell me about that fortune-telling thing your grandmother did? Molly asked. You really want to know? You're asking? Of course, it's so interesting. Okay, he nodded. I'll tell you about it when we get there. A free table at this hour was not easy to get, but Mason managed to get one, and in a very private corner away from prying eyes. My grandmother. He started when they ordered. She's an oracle, so she can really tell the future. Molly marveled. Yes, nodded Mason. She can do that and more. A few years ago, when I was very young, she played a big solitaire game to find out my fate. The first time she laid it out was when I was first born, and never again since then, until I was produced as a man of the family. That's how Molly got interested. It's a complicated ceremony, Mason grumbled. You'll find out someday. Briefly, when a boy reaches the age of 16, he is declared a grown man in front of the whole family, real men and all. That's the day Grandma laid out her circular solitaire. That's what she calls it. Then she told my mother and father that my future wife lives in a far northern country. And although not called Ramalaya, she has our blood flowing in her veins. So it's definitely not me who laughed. Sad, Molly. Or did your grandmother mistake my veins for gypsy blood? No. Are you sure? Mason squinted. To what need do you know your ancestors? At least to the fifth. You know, the fifth. The girl was confused. It's like 5 generations back in time, Mason explained. Father and mother. Second 2 grandfathers and grandmothers, third and so on. I don't even know both my grandmothers. That's sad, Molly said. My mom died in childbirth, and my father never told me about her parents, and his own mother. My grandmother took care of me while I was very tiny, then died, and my grandfather died even earlier. That's about it. A few pictures in an album. I can't even remember their names. Is that how you do it? Mason threw up his hands. What do you mean you don't know your own grandparents? Just like that, Molly replied, embarrassed. What can I do? Besides, look, I don't look like a gypsy at all. There are redheads among the Romels, Mason replied. They have the hottest fire in their blood. My grandmother was a fiery redhead when she was young. She was, Molly marveled. I thought you were all dark. No, laughed Mason. That's just prejudice. But you never told me where you lived, Molly reminded him. I know gypsies are nomads, but you're not always traveling. Your knowledge of my people comes entirely from books. Mason laughed again. Besides, we are such different nomadic Romels, the lowest caste, so to speak. My family is at the top of the hierarchy. Our family has been in Romania for centuries. I'm a Romanian citizen. Wow, Molly marveled. Romania. That's not where Count Dracula's castle is. Again, prejudice raised his eyes upward. Mason. Yes, the Count once lived in what is now Romania. But he wasn't exactly a vampire, just a harsh ruler. I'm not a vampire either. And he put his hands up disarmingly. But I was already convinced of that. Molly laughed. "You had the perfect opportunity to drink my blood. And if you didn't take it, you're not a vampire." They sat in the cafe for a long time, talking about all sorts of things, and at the end of the evening they went for a walk along the promenade and agreed that tomorrow they would go to meet Mason's relatives. "They are all very anxious to see you," her lover told the girl at parting. The day after university, he picked up Molly in his luxurious BMW. And this time Daddy's guards did not pump up. All the way they followed them a little farther away. "Dear Miss de Yang, come in quickly. And my dear, what a beauty your romaine is. Children, let me have a good look at you. Honey, welcome to the family. You are a beautiful true Romala, like my mother." Dumbfounded to receive such a warm welcome, Molly stood smiling stupidly, and compliments, smiles, warm hugs, compliments again, poured in on her from all sides. She thought it would only be Mason's parents. But there were so many people here, and all so friendly, as if she were a relative they all hadn't seen in a long time. Before she knew it, they were singing, standing in a lively circle, clapping their hands, and she and Mason were in the center of it. And two others, a man and a woman. The man played the guitar, and the woman danced very beautifully and fiercely. Molly's legs were twitching. She wanted to dance too. Mason noticed it and invited her to dance, showing her what moves to repeat. The girl caught it on the fly, and in a couple of minutes, she was dashing along with all the gypsies, as if she had been doing it all her life. Those standing in the circle also joined in the dance, and the fun continued, playing and dancing and singing. Finally, the music stopped and everyone was invited to the table. "You are good," Mason praised her in a whisper. "Her parents liked the way you danced." "Which of them are your parents?" Molly also quietly inquired. "You'll find out in a moment," the boy promised. And indeed, when everyone poured ruby-colored, bright wine into glasses, a strong black-haired man in a beautiful suit from Armani stood up from the table. And an incredibly beautiful woman with a face so expressive Molly had never seen in her life. These two men gave the speech tonight. "We present the bride of our eldest son." You all just had the opportunity to appreciate her undoubted beauty and grace at these words. Molly was embarrassed and tilted her head. And the future father-in-law continued besides this union is predetermined by a great fate. And my honorable mother foretold it long before today's happy day. Let us drink to the health of the young. May their loins be blessed. Everyone raised their glasses, but did not toast and drank to the proposed toast. Then Mason's mother, my dear daughter-in-law, took the floor. "I have 4 sons and only 1 daughter. With your arrival in our family, I will have 2 daughters, and I am very happy. You are beautiful and intelligent. I can see that right away. My son made his choice, and I'm proud of him and you. Daughter, soon we will give you a lavish and rich wedding that will be the envy of Queen Luna herself. I very much hope for a soon addition to our large family, where we welcome you today with great love. Daughter." The woman walked over to Molly, smiled gently at her and hugged her. Molly even had tears in her eyes, because she grew up without a mother and did not know a woman's affection. And her father never had any friends or relatives in the house. It's like living in a prison. More than once she thought to herself, but here there were so many friendly, genuinely happy with each other and with Mason. They were all so cheerful, so nice, and seemed to be completely different from the stereotypical view that exists among other peoples about gypsies. All beautifully dressed, the women had marvelous figures, the makeup was impeccable. And the mansion that this large family rented here, as Mason had informed her, was also a model of excellent style. No dirt, no motley rags, nothing of the sort. "We have to answer something too," Molly asked Mason quietly. When everyone settled back into their seats later, he smiled at her. "I'll say something back at the end. And then you, if you want to." But that was not all the surprises of tonight that awaited Molly. A few minutes later, 2 beautiful boxes, one small, were brought into the large room where everyone was seated. Mason's father solemnly handed it to Molly. The larger one was opened in front of her by his mother. "This is for you, darling. You'll wear it to the wedding." Molly was breathless with excitement. The big flat box contained a gorgeous tiara studded with diamonds, emeralds, and sapphires. and a pair of earrings to go with it. And in the small one was a marvelous ring with a beautiful but unfamiliar stone in the middle. It was the color of coffee and milk and beautifully cut. It was a topaz, a fortune teller's stone. My mother told me to give it to you. My father-in-law told Molly and even bowed slightly to her. She didn't come with us too old, but she said that in time you will be a child. Mine will take her place. I was confused, Molly, and immediately remembered the end of the divination. You will become a priestess. That's what Nancy said to accept our gratitude. Mason came to her rescue. Bow, he said in Molly's ear. She obeyed and put the ring on her middle finger. Now it's my turn to give my Romanesa a gift, solemnly said Mason and knelt down on one knee and handed Molly another box. This one contained an emerald ring studded with small diamonds. Next came dinner, lots of different foods, lots of drinks, then dancing again. And at the end of the evening, the young couple made a return speech. Molly followed her fiancé with warm and full of gratitude words. They were applauded for a long time. The wedding was scheduled for August, and until then, the young people had to lead a real nomadic life to prove to the clan that they were real Romels. That was their tradition. That was what Mason had explained to her beforehand. At the end of the journey, they were to arrive at the huge castle of the king of the Romanian Romels. Our ruler will receive you like all his other children and bless you, the relatives told the departing young men. They also agreed on a return visit to Molly's father. Molly, of course, was skeptical about this possibility. She was sure that her father would refuse and make a huge scandal, having learned about everything. Of course, she was not mistaken. "Good morning, Papa," she said to her father the next morning. "I have some news for you." "What's the news?" My father mumbled, taking his eyes off the TV. "I'm getting married." Molly exhaled and gave her father a determined look that made him get up from his seat. His jowls were moving around in his face. "Who are you going to marry?" "To that show-offy young man who's got something to show for it." "Dad, you know what kind of car he drives." Molly rebuked him. "Your surveillance told you everything." "Don't be like that." She couldn't find the right word. "Mason has a very wealthy family. They're all so nice, so kind." "How do you know?" "Did your father get mad?" "They told you themselves." "Yes," nodded the daughter. "Look." She held out her hands with both rings on them. "Stolen or fake?" the father declared, without even looking. "And the car's probably stolen too." "I'll have it checked tomorrow." "It has Romanian license plates," mockingly, Molly replied. "I don't think you can check that. Are you going to Romania?" My dad's jaw dropped. "Who are all these Romanian gypsies?" The daughter replied calmly. And that was the last straw in his patience. The father yelled nonstop, threw dishes, broke his own favorite statue of a hound dog, and promised to lock Molly in the house until she came to her senses. "You can't hold me," she said to him. "I'm going to leave with him anyway. It's my destiny, you know? What the hell fate is? They just put a spell on you over and over again," Dad yelled. "I'll find a way to deal with them. You know that. In the meantime, go to your room and sit there." "I thought much better of you," Molly shook her head. "This is all useless." "Dad, we're already husband and wife for your information." She didn't listen to what he was yelling. She went back to her room. Molly had packed her bag with her belongings in advance, and now all she had to do was find a way to break out of her home prison. It wasn't easy. Her father had his ammunition everywhere. There were 2 in the lobby right across from her room, 2 more downstairs by the gate, a whole company as usual, and a couple out back. That's not much to go on. Mason locked me in. Molly texted her fiancé. "There's guards everywhere." "What am I gonna do?" "Come get me out of here." "I'll be there in an hour, but before I get there, you have to say 3 strong words." Mason wrote her back. "I'll send them to you right now in voice practice and repeat them exactly as I say them. If you do it right, everyone around you will get tired and we can leave without any trouble. And if I don't," Molly thought. "If I can't, or if I do something wrong, what then?" She tried to push those dark thoughts away from her and began repeating over and over the words that came in the voicemail. She looked out into the hallway and the ambassadors were still sitting around the TV. Molly defiantly walked by to see their reaction. It was the same as always. No one was asleep. Returning to the room with the bottle of Coke she had supposedly left the room for, she began practicing again and finally felt that she was already doing exactly as she had in the recording. Repeating it 3 times, she looked out into the hallway again, cautiously getting closer to the guards. Oh wonder they were both sleeping like dead people. Grabbing her bag, Molly slipped past the similarly sleeping ones at the front door and with a wince, pulled back the intricate deadbolt on the door at the gate. No one woke up. No one came out. No one stopped her alley. There was Mason's car. Get in, my love. Now we shall never be separated from you again. He kissed her, and they drove away from here. When after a while Molly's father found his daughter nowhere to be found, he no longer shouted at the guards and raged, but only sank quietly on the bed, covered his face with his hands, and muttered a muffled curse. So it had happened after all. And pulling out a picture of a smiling red-haired woman who looked a lot like Molly, told her you were right, Miranda. Our daughter's back on the Tabor. Why did she have to go through all this? Why? And he cried. And the carefree and in love young people already settled down in one of the rooms of the huge mansion, where Molly had already been when she got acquainted with Mason's relatives. Rest while you can, one of the aunts said jokingly, and went out, shutting the door behind her. What does she mean? Molly asked the groom. Soon we will be traveling, my love, answered Mason. You and I, and a few others of our own. By August, we should be home by car across Europe. Molly marveled. That's great. No, we're not going by car. Gently stopped her raptures. Mason. And on what is carefree? Asked the girl. On a wagon, he smiled. On an ordinary wagon, you mean? She was digesting this news with amazement. That we're going to ride horses. Yes, Mason nodded. Do you know how to ride a horse? On horseback, yes, Molly informed him. I studied horseback riding for several years. That's fine. And now you have to master the art of the charioteer, laughed the guy. 2 weeks later, Miss and Molly and a few other relatives loaded some things into a wagon pulled by 2 horses. They bought the necessary provisions and set out on their journey. The rest of the gypsies left some other way, more civilized. Molly was excited about the unusual journey ahead. To ride like real nomads, to sleep wherever they wanted under the moon and stars. What could be better? It was as if some wild instinct had awakened in her, and with her soul wide open and her eyes wide open, she gave herself completely to the new passion. Needless to say, she was not the least bit sorry to leave her hometown, her friend's university, everything she knew and loved. It was only at the thought of her father that her heart clenched tightly. But Molly couldn't do anything else. She knew it was her destiny, and you can't argue with destiny. Clear roads with the kind of transportation they had now. It was a little over 2.5 weeks. But both men and horses need rest and food. So they expected to get there in about a month, maybe a month and a half. There were unforeseen events too. And there was one time on the road when a cinch broke. Another one had to be repaired, and another one had a flat tire. The wagon needed repairs too. Besides, they tried to go far away from noisy highways, so as not to frighten the horses, and not to breathe smoke and cinders, and not to become the object of increased attention of travelers' motorists. My friends would hardly recognize me now, laughed Molly, sitting in the driver's seat and holding the reins. She wore a mottled patchwork skirt, a loose-fitting white shirt, and a bright crimson silk vest. Her hair was tied up in the same crimson handkerchief, but silk handkerchiefs are not practical, as she had already seen. They slip out of her hair no matter how you tie them. You're a real Romola now, smiled Mason, who sat beside her, smiling affectionately at her, also dressed, as befitted a key gypsy, in loose pants of plain cloth, an embroidered vest, and a simple chintz shirt. Do you have any regrets? No, Molly answered him with a pure heart. Nothing at all, but at night, especially in the morning hours, when the line between the worlds is so thin, Molly often woke up and then felt a longing for her father and an oppressive sense of anxiety for him. Leaving, she wrote him a few messages in which she asked him not to judge her harshly, saying that she had gone to Romania. She didn't specify how. She hoped that her father would change his mind and come to visit her in her new home. When we are settled, I will write you my new address, Molly said. She never received a reply to any of her messages. On the road, which she enjoyed so much, she became very close to her new tribesmen, of whom there were 6 others traveling with them. During the day, they took turns driving the wagon, singing the chorus of various gypsy songs, and by all accounts, Molly was the best at it. The women taught her intricate national embroidery, the art of making small dishes, and even the infamous fortune-telling. Molly laughed herself to tears, feeling it more, it less than Cassandra. She wrote to Nancy and the other girls with whom she still kept in touch that she was about to become a real priestess. The cards weren't called tarot, but the pictures were similar. And soon Molly had mastered the complex solitaires and layouts. One day, her female relative said to her, "Well, now you're a real fortune teller. Go earn our lunch." How amazed Molly was. And you see at the gas station nearby, cars stop, people come out to rest. Go over there and offer to read their fortunes. Why? Molly was surprised again. Don't we have anything to eat? Yes, honey. The groceries running out made the woman's face sorrowful. Go on, go on. Molly turned helplessly to Mason, but he only shrugged and smiled, expressing solidarity with the tribesmen. There was nothing to do. I had to go. Good people, come here for fortune-telling. Started a monotonous voice Molly 100 times heard, as it does new relatives. For luck, for love. Who needs to know what the future holds? Come on over, I'll open it for cheap. It's all right in the palm of your hand. She was so alive in her role that without shyness approached the expensive foreign car and leaned over looking through the open window. Do you want to fortune-telling beauty? Let's just quickly, before her husband came back, said a woman sitting in the front seat. Give me your pen, my dear, and gild mine. Molly smiled at this poor prisoner of progress and felt in her gut how unhappy she was. Dear Molly quickly stuffed in her pocket the bill that the woman gave her. You don't live well and you don't love your husband. I should love him. The woman sighed heavily. Such a womanizer, that there is no means for him to quit going to women. And leaving yourself. Get a divorce, beautiful? Molly quickly told her. And then fate will turn to your bright side. How pathetic, asked the woman. He has money, and I have nothing, not even an education. And you get an education slowly with his money. Molly advised her. And don't tell him. I don't think he'd be interested. Really, look for a job. Make sure you're on your own. Get a lawyer after all. And then just walk away and be free. Darling, I wish you happiness. You're very good at fortune-telling. Admired the woman. No one has ever said such a thing. Wait, she rummaged in her purse and pulled out a couple more bills. Here you go. Thanks for the tip. You're welcome. Sweet Molly, a little taken aback by her success, quickly stepped away from the car when she saw a man coming out of the gas station pavilion, looking at the car. Here, she said proudly, walking back across the highway to her own. Take that, Mason, shouted the women, laughing. Your young one will soon overtake us all. You sure you're not Romola, honey? For the umpteenth time they asked Molly, laughing. She told him, smiling. It's just my destiny to tie my life to the gypsies. At the Polish customs they were held for a whole day, asking for some documents they simply did not have. In the end, they gave up. They were tired of the pesky gypsies, who had already managed to bore everything and everyone around them. During their forced parking, Molly had just had a passport, but Mason told her not to even show it. The Romels travel on their own. They don't carry any documents with them. It's tradition. We're a free people, Mason told her. We don't need any silly paperwork. However, at the Romanian border, he did show some kind of document. Molly noticed that and also noticed how the customs officers changed their faces. They almost saluted. What did you show them? She asked the groom. I told you that we don't need silly papers. It's different here, Mason smiled. We've come home now. This is where my document is needed. They drove on through Romania with some fun. The weather was beautiful. The people around them were very friendly. Almost every other person smiled and waved at them. The peasants in the small villages were bringing all kinds of food to the river, and here they no longer earned money by fortune-telling. It's as if every dog knows you here. Molly laughed. That's right, the tribesman answered her. Now we are home in our native land. Local beauties, rocky mountains, fertile plains, and here and there ancient castles and less often picturesque ruins. Molly was delighted. How beautifully she marveled as she looked around. This is the most beautiful country I've ever been in. Now it's your home country too. Mason answered her affectionately. Soon we'll be there. It was getting dark, I think by this evening, when a tall and austere castle appeared right in front of them, as if sealing the narrow mountain road. It seemed so ancient to Molly, as if it had grown out of the rock on which it stood. The walls of its color really did not differ much from the rock. But how beautiful was it? What kind of castle is this? Molly asked the groom. It is Foger the Pellows, answered Mason. Our home. This is your home. Molly was stunned. She never expected her fiancé to be the heir to such splendor. Our house, repeated Mason. Not just mine. Our family's and yours is now Fogerpels too. Molly repeated thoughtfully. What does that mean, an indestructible shelter? Answered Mason proudly. It has stood on this earth for 1,500 years and will stand for as long, and perhaps even more, as long as at least one Rommel of our family lives. They entered the castle courtyard in the dark. Nothing could be seen on that steep mountain road, and Molly's heart was racing. It seemed to her that they were about to fall into the abyss. Well, the kinsmen knew their business, and the horses, urged on by the skillful driver, pulled the wagon uphill and uphill. The Romalas were greeted by their relatives, who crowded into the wide, paved courtyard. They were our young people. Mason and Molly had arrived. They were grabbed from all sides. They lifted them in their arms, put wreaths of fragrant flowers and some incredible leaves around their necks, and literally carried them in their arms inside. Thousands of candles burned in the huge hall. Long tables of roughly worked wood seemed as old as the castle itself, a high vault, and the windows went 6 meters below the ceiling, invisible in the semi-darkness. It even seemed to Molly that there was something up there. She noticed some swift movements, someone's quick shadows gliding in the darkness. What is it? She whispered to Mason. I'm scared. It's bats, the boy laughed. They've always lived here, for as long as I can remember. The feast rolled on until dawn, and then the young people were ceremoniously escorted into the huge, lavishly furnished bedroom. Molly liked the fact that her parents had no prejudices about a formal wedding. She didn't even know if it was customary to register a state marriage here. Yeah, she didn't really care. But another question had plagued her for weeks, and she had been afraid to admit it to Mason. But now that she was under a real roof and in a real bed, she suddenly made up her mind. Darling, there's something I want to tell you. I don't know how you're going to take it. What is it? He was sitting on the edge of the bed, taking off his boots, but he turned to her and looked at her with a smile. All right, yes or no? Anyway, I'm pregnant. She blurted out and froze, not knowing how he would take it. Mason remained silent and looked at her with a strange expression. Then she couldn't stand it anymore and spoke quickly. I suppose we had better not talk about all this for a while. I don't think we ought to give such news before the wedding. How will your family take it? What if they don't like it? Molly suddenly interrupted her. Mason. Stop, please. What? Almost crying. She asked. You have no idea what a gift you've given me. He jumped out of bed in one boot, picked her up in his arms, and spun her around the room, screaming with delight. I'm going to be a father soon. We'll announce at the wedding. That's wonderful, Molly. Let go. She fought back, laughing. Let me go later. Her mother-in-law, whom Mason had told, quietly explained to her that a bride's pregnancy before the wedding was a very good sign. It means that the marriage will definitely bear its due fruit, and the great family of the Rommels will not run dry. You've been sent to us by fate. She hugged Molly. There's someone else you need to meet today. By the evening of the next day, Molly, washed clean, changed, and rested, was taken to a small house, standing separately on the castle grounds. After knocking, they entered, and Molly saw such a picture. A very old woman, gray as the moon with silver long hair, partially braided into thin braids, sat in front of a hearth, burning in broad daylight, and smoking a large pipe. All the walls and even the ceiling of the room where the hearth was burning were hung with poisons of dried herbs, carcasses, and skins of killed animals ranging from hares to lizards to bats in a cauldron. Above the hearth, something was bubbling in a cauldron, and even higher up on the stove stood a large copper kettle, cleaned to a mirror shine. Two young Romalas sat near the old woman. One was sewing something with a big, thick needle, and the other was rubbing a brown-smelling ointment on her feet. "Sit down." The old woman looked at Molly and pointed to the bench beside her and nodded to the couch behind her. Molly timidly sat down. The old woman put her hand on her head and closed her sunken eyes. Then she started rocking back and forth and humming something monotonously. This went on for a long time. Molly was about to fall asleep when suddenly the old woman lifted her wrinkled, dry palm from her head and clapped her hands together, saying something loudly. The language was incomprehensible, and she was surprised. After all, she had learned Romelian quite well in the few weeks she had been traveling. "Now you are one of us," the old woman said in a familiar language. "When you give birth, come to me, I will teach you." "Thank you." "Barely," Molly said, puzzled as to when they had already told this old woman about her pregnancy. "Are you wearing my ring?" the old woman inquired, with a squeaky voice. "Yes," Molly showed her other hand. "So your Grandma Mason," she exclaimed. The old woman smiled, showing yellow ground teeth. "Yours too." "Of course it's mine now." Molly took her hand and kissed it in a gesture of love and submission. "The older good girl." The old woman stroked her head. "The goatche." Molly realized that she had called her a daughter, and it warmed her heart. The wedding took place a few days after their arrival. It was truly a grand celebration. A whole week of festivities, so many people came to visit. It seemed the huge castle couldn't accommodate them all. But somehow they dispersed. On the first day, there was a symbolic bargaining session. Molly sat there covered by a translucent veil, and the relatives bargained for her with themselves. In the absence of the bride's parents that day, the future father-in-law invited her to a ceremonial, elaborate dance. On another day, young unmarried girls came and began to dress and calm Molly. The gorgeous dress was not white, as Molly thought, but a delicate lilac with bright scarlet ruffles. The girl's long red hair was loose and partially braided into small, elegant braids, which were folded on her head in the form of a hoop, then put on top of the family tiara, presented by the future mother-in-law. Dressed as a princess, Molly led with songs downstairs in the great hall. Here already waited for her Mason, also richly dressed, and also with a crown on his head. What surprised Molly? Mason's father also had a crown on his head. How many crowns do they have? Molly thought to herself. She took their hands and made a quick cut on the ring fingers with a sharp knife, and then he joined his hands together so that the blood would mingle. "You are now man and wife forever," he proclaimed. "My hairs are the next king and queen of our family. May it never fade away." Molly was literally numb with amazement. It turns out her husband was the heir to the royal family of Rommel. So that's why their carriage was greeted by the locals with enthusiastic shouts. "Let me introduce you to my wife, the future queen of the Romanian Rommels," Mason said loudly, taking the young wife by the hand. "She is expecting my hair." A general murmur and shouts rose up. At these words of Mason drowned out even the loud music, which was played by a live orchestra somewhere at the very vault of the high castle and its ceilings. "Long live the king, glory to Rommel." And everyone shouted hooray for the hair. "May your union be blessed." The wine flowed and the tables were filled with food for days to come. In the end, Molly was so tired that just fell on the bed and announced to her husband that she intended to lie like that for a week. "Lie down, rest," he smiled. "Did you deserve it?" Now, a truly royal life began for Molly. She was served by several young girls who fulfilled her every whim. Everyone in the castle was at her service, except for her husband's parents, the king and queen of Rommel. Even they were constantly visiting her chambers, bringing generous gifts and inquiring about the health of the dear daughter-in-law and the future baby for the wedding. Her young husband gave her a BMW like the one he drove when they met, only in the exact same topaz color, and father-in-law and mother-in-law gave the young couple a luxurious villa in the center of Bucharest, where Mason and Molly spent many unforgettable days. Walking around Romania's capital, dining in the choicest restaurants, and thinking up a name for their baby boy. "It's gonna be a boy," Molly said confidently, putting her husband's hand on her belly, feeling the shoving like a young foal. Happy Mason gently kissed his wife's rounded belly. "My son, I can't wait to see you." At the end of March, a healthy son was born to a young Romal couple. On this occasion, a large-scale celebration took place again, and Molly was again showered with gifts. A year later, they had a second son, and the young woman plunged headlong into the care of their beloved babies. Time flowed imperceptibly, and now they celebrated their third wedding anniversary, and Molly felt pregnant again. Everything went on as normal. One day, their routine was disturbed by an event that Molly noticed only a few days later, when she found her old smartphone with an old SIM card in her desk drawer. She turned it on and topped up the balance. Immediately, a bunch of messages came, and among them from her father. He wrote that he missed her very much and asked when he could visit his daughter. Molly immediately dialed his number and listened with bated breath to the long beeps. Finally, he answered. Daddy trembled. In a voice, she said, "It's me, Molly, daughter." He was obviously pleased, but his voice was husky and unhappy. "I never thought I'd hear from you. How are you doing?" "I'm fine, Dad, come visit." "Yeah, I'd like to." "Write down your address." "I wrote to you a long time ago, but I'll say it again." "Of course, come and see your grandchildren." Was it just her imagination, or did he sob? "I'll get the tickets tomorrow. We'll meet you at the airport." 2 days later, she and Mason met her father in Bucharest. They saw Molly and Mason dressed luxuriously in their chauffeured Cadillac. Father was clearly astonished, but didn't show it. They had come first to the villa, so he could rest before their trip to the mountains. "Come in, Dad. Make yourself at home," Molly told him. "Where are my grandchildren?" Dad turned his head, looking at the immaculate furnishings of the villa. "They are at home on the estate in the mountains." They explained to him, "This is where we live when we come to Bucharest." My father's Molly castle was simply stunning. And when the king and queen of the Romalas met him at the gala dinner in full parade, he was simply numb for a few seconds. Molly saw it. Well, the daughter found herself in her private suite. He moved his hand around, unable to find the right words. "And all this time I was thinking like a fool, that I had you wandering the world like an orphan. Why did you laugh?" "Molly, although we did come here as simple nomadic rums in a wagon, can you imagine? It was a kind of exam, a tradition before the wedding. It was explained to me later, so I wouldn't forget my roots. But I already knew the Mason family was wealthy. I told you, remember?" "I remember," Dad admitted. Guilty. "There's something I have to tell you." "Daughter," he added, and pulled from the breast pocket of his jacket a picture of a young, laughing, red-haired woman. "That's your mom. I have one just like it." And Molly showed hers in a beautiful frame standing on the dresser. "Yes, of course, but you don't know her story. I kept it from you for a long time, daughter." "Your mother was a Romany gypsy," automatically corrected Molly, and immediately shrieked that yes, her father nodded. "She was born in a nomadic Tabor, but was orphaned at the age of 10. I met her by chance and immediately fell madly in love. It was like an electric shock. I experienced the same thing when I met Mason." Molly whispered in tears. "We didn't live together long," Dad continued. "Soon you were born, and she died the same day." Michael wiped away the tears with his handkerchief. "But before she died, she told me our daughter would meet her destiny and return to the Tabor." "I know that. Don't keep her swear to be husband," and I swore, and I broke my vow. How am I to blame before her?" He dropped his head in his palms and sobbed. "Don't, Papa." Molly gently stroked her father's shoulders. "It's all right now. You can't escape fate. Do you see that now? I didn't want you to live in misery," her father said. "I was so afraid of losing you forever, like your mom. Now we're together." Molly hugged him and kissed him on the cheek. "Live here with us. Sell everything. Buy yourself an apartment in Bucharest or a house here, whatever you want. You'll see your grandchildren, and soon you'll have a granddaughter." Molly said proudly, "Isn't that a blessing?" Yes, yes, her father cheered up. You're absolutely right, dear. That is true happiness. I think that's what I'm going to do. Of course, it's the right thing to do. Then my Miranda will forgive me wherever she is now. A couple of years later, a visiting traveler would see such a picture in the vicinity of an ancient castle. An elderly gray-haired man walking day in and day out on the picturesque meadow-grassed plateaus. With 3 grandchildren, 2, a dark-haired boy and a small, nimble girl with a head the color of a white chestnut, ran around like clockwork. And the grandfather, sitting in a folding chair, watched them carefully and from time to time pulled them down when the 3 were very naughty. Miranda, Miranda, stop bullying the boys. Let's all get ready for lunch. Let's go. And they walked up the winding mountain path to the foot of the ancient castle that seemed to grow out of the rock, cherishing one big and friendly family. For several hundred long years, the castle and the people living in it had the same destiny. And as you know, you can't argue with fate.